Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Movie Night here on Random Trek. I am your fearless captain, Christopher Ingle, joined as always by my first officer, who you might say is my navigator on this flight here tonight, Commander Brennan, the Mystical Mar. Brennan, any idea what movie we watching tonight?
Well, I would try to do a Pee Wee Herman impression, but it would sound terrible. So I'm not going to do it.
And there you have everybody. Hey, this is bad. Don't make me do this.
Yeah.
Today, we are taking a look at the 1986 Walt Disney sci fi film Flight of the Navigator, a film that was on in my childhood over and over and over again. But today, well, my daughter, who was going to join us, decided to be a teenager and to go off on her own little shore leave and hang out with friends, as teenagers do. So we're joined by my wife again, the ship's counselor, who totally understood and watched this movie with me. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, honey.
Thank you for joining us on our last minute. We always love having you on. So Brennan, what are your memories of this movie beyond watching it this week?
I do not think I had seen it in 30 years.
Wow.
I watched it when I was probably 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there, and I haven't seen it since. But I did watch it the other day, and I remembered a lot of it. There were other parts that I didn't remember at all.
Mhm.
But it was really interesting to go back and look at it. Because I know this is like an 80s nostalgic cult classic for everyone who grew up on it.
Mhm.
I didn't grow up on this one, so this is a little bit different for me.
Yeah. Lisa, what are your memories of this film beyond this week?
I remember it being on a lot. I guess it would have been more as a teen for me, and then didn't see it again for a long time until we watched it together. So yeah, I had a lot of memories of it. But again, like Brennan said, there were things that I remembered and things that I didn't.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, this was another one of those. A lot of the films that I pick, you'll notice a theme here. This was one again that was on kind of on the Saturday, Sunday morning shows all the time. And the movie itself, what's really great is you don't have to cut it down for commercials because it's a 90-minute movie.
Mm.
So it played all the time on, those local channels that were on. And so I saw this movie so many times growing up regularly. It was just on rotation. At least once a month, it was on TV on one of the channels. And
Mm.
I'd watch it because it was so much fun. This was right at the time, by the time it was on, Pee-wee's Playhouse was big for me. It was huge. In fact, I still remember when it wasn't on the air anymore, asking, why isn't it on the air? And I had no answers as, a 5, 6 year old. But watching this movie, having Pee-wee's voice, I heard Pee-wee's voice, I was immediately
I
engaged.
know what you are, but what am I?
And then you remember when I'm married. Yeah. Oh, it's so bad. Anyway, but it's one that I just kept going back to over and over and over again. And you know what? I'll say it now. This is not a great film, but it's a very forgiving film. Like this is a really good sci-fi for kids. If your kids couldn't handle ET, and I know a lot of kids that can't handle ET,
Yeah.
find it a little slow, maybe a little scary. This really feels like ET light.
Mm.
And not in a bad way. It's not a great film, but it is a perfectly serviceable sci-fi memory. And I think that's why it sticks with me is I saw it so many times and it's harmless. It really is. But you know what? Let's get into discussing the film. And so I turn over the con to Commander Brennan.
Thank you, Captain, sir. Um, yes, in the 1986 film, directed by Randall Kleiser, who because I also host a Star Wars podcast, I have to mention that Randall Kleiser was George Lucas's roommate at the University of Southern California. Part of that group of filmmakers that came out of USC in the late 60s. And Randall Kleiser, of course, directed Grease, The Blue Lagoon, and this film, including many others. It's certainly a filmmaker with quite a few films that people remember under his belt. And this film, I would agree, is not a great film, but definitely part of that nostalgic fun of the 80s. Just good, crazy, slightly scary, adventurous fun. So let's get into talking about the story. So it's pretty interesting that this kid named David is looking for his little brother in the woods and he falls in a ravine and gets knocked out. When he wakes up, 8 years have passed, but he has not aged. At the same time, a strange spacecraft has crashed on Earth, and David seems to have a connection with the ship and is able to operate it when no one else can. Because he is the navigator, and he makes a connection with Max, the AI controlling the ship, and goes on some pretty wild adventures, being hounded by government agents, as they do in the 80s, apparently. So, before we get into dissecting the story, I felt during the first bit of the movie, it felt very Stranger Things to me. Lisa, did you feel that Stranger Things connection?
I've never seen Stranger Things, so I
Oh,
don't.
okay, all right.
Um, I did feel that it was the harmony in the family was amazing.
Oh, yes.
You have that quintessential brother love-hate relationship.
Oh, yes.
You have the perfect parents, which you had in all the 80s films.
Oh,
The
yes.
perfect parents who were constantly yelling at the kids. Um, and they always have a pet. Um, but as it moves on, you have that eerie feeling. And there's always, and it has the jump scares.
Oh, yes.
And they're little jump scares. They're not like a regular scary movie where they're the huge jump scares. These are just leading up to what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And they're nothing. They're absolutely nothing. The little bumps in the night.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see how it was getting started.
Good point. Chris, what do you think of the Stranger Things?
Yeah, I mean, I too have not. I watched some Stranger Things, the first few episodes, so I kind of get the idea you're talking about. There's
Sinister
a little,
government agents.
yeah, a little bit of this. First of all, the nostalgia feel that the
Mm-hmm.
80s bring about. This had the 70s because remember, it's filmed in 1986.
Yes.
So the 70s portion, which is the first 15-20 minutes of the movie, is still 78. So
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of leading back to that. You see it a little bit in her hairstyle, um the clothes that they're wearing.
Mm-hmm.
Um it really fits in there because then when we hit 1986, we kind of get inundated with these 80s eponymous kinds of things. We get reference to Twisted Sister. You see GI Joes and Transformers and He-Man and like all these.
MTV.
Yeah, and MTV, yeah. So yeah, I kind of see that. But yeah, this whole what's really going on and the government that's coming through and um absolutely I
The
do
kid
see
who's
this as
disappeared.
yeah, the kid who disappeared. Yes.
Hmm.
I do see that in here in this a little bit. And of course again the nostalgia. The nostalgia is just as important in that first season of Stranger Things as it is here.
Yeah, there's nostalgia, I think, on many levels, because not only is it nostalgic for the 70s, but it's nostalgic now that the kids who grow up watching this movie.
Mhm.
Now, as far as the story, the idea of this kid that is able to connect with this mysterious spacecraft, yeah, it's very symbiotic. It's like E.T. and Elliot in the sense that there is a connection between the two. And in this case, David's connection with the spaceship and, the crazy adventures he goes on there. Uh, what did you think? I'll start with you, Chris, with just the overall story of this film.
The story is simple and I really love it.
Mhm.
I also really appreciate too kind of it doesn't go heavy into it, but I love science. And the idea of Einstein's theories of relativity are actually fairly adhered to here.
Yeah.
The idea of time dilation and it is important into this story. The reason why we are where we are is the spaceship travels faster than light, and of course Einstein theorized that as closer to the speed of light that you go, time around your ship will speed up while it's slower for you. So
Mm,
you'll age at your normal rate, but outside of you will go much faster. And so that's what seems to have happened here. That's how 8 years has passed by. And the ship is, afraid to take him back.
mhm,
And now we got to deal with the mystery of discovering all this information. How are we going to get it home? It's pretty cut and dry. There's not a lot of complication in here, but I really love that the sci-fi elements are not the most beyond that they could be. There is a little bit of grounding in here, and I like that.
yeah, but the idea of him disappearing for 8 years and coming back not aged, I think that's a fascinating story because, as you say, with these theories from Einstein, how crazy would it be to experience it for real, where everyone else ages but you don't? I mean, it's a crazy
Mhm.
idea, and also just the idea that he is chosen basically to represent humans
Mhm.
as far as understanding of other creatures. Lisa, what did you think of the story here?
I think the story was great. It's another one that again takes you on a little bit of a roller coaster with your emotions. Not a heavy roller coaster, but a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's more laughing and seriousness. Um,
Hmm.
I like the science aspect of it because it does ground it. It's more realistic.
Hmm.
It's the government aspect of it is not totally realistic, but
Yeah.
it's got some realism to it. Um, but it it's cutesy.
Hmm.
For what it is, it's cutesy.
Yeah, it doesn't take itself too seriously.
No, and it's like Chris said, it's great for all ages, even the littles.
Hmm.
It's not going to scare them before you put them to bed.
Yeah, yeah, good point. And of course we get to, what is I consider to be the heart of most films, and that's the characters. It's an interesting cast because we consider that another movie that we just recently did, Ridley Scott's Alien, the character of Lambert is played by Veronica Cartwright, who plays David's mom in this film. So that's a fun little connection. You have a 20-year-old Sarah Jessica Parker, which I thought was fascinating that she was, I mean, so young in this film.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, she's gone on to do many, many things. And as far as like the rest of the cast, this isn't really an A-list cast kind of movie.
Mhm.
But the real show stealer is Paul Rubens, aka Pee Wee Herman, as Max, the um, computer that controls the spaceship. Um,
Of course, no one knew that it was him at the time. He went
yeah,
under a pen name for this film.
Paul Mall.
How appropriate.
Yes. Mm. And he's really the show stealer, and it's funny because he plays it very straight until he scans David's mind, and then all the Pee Wee Hermanisms come out.
Mhm.
And that's really maybe the most memorable part of the film. So there's a lot of characters here, but I wanted to focus really just on. We had Joey Kramer as David, um, an actor that, after this film, he didn't really do much in the way of acting in major roles. Um, but what do we think of this performance? Lisa, your thoughts on Joey Kramer as David?
I think the kid that played David did a beautiful job. I mean, a lot of kids, they're either good or they're bad
Mm-hmm.
or mediocre. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily bad, but mediocre. I think he did a really good job. He made you believe that he was David.
Yeah,
And when he was scared, he made you believe he was scared. I
yeah.
mean, when he was angry, you believed he was angry. So, I mean, he really did a good job. And for a kid that age to be able to pull off that kind of acting, that takes some
Mm-hmm.
talent.
Yeah, I mean, the scene when he, comes to, when he goes back to his house and somebody else is living there, and he kind of goes into a panic. I mean, yeah, it's fully believable. It's
Right,
very his emotional breakdown makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
right. And that takes a bit of talent.
It does, yeah. But you're right. Kid actors in movies can be hit or miss. And usually it's not them. Usually it's how they're directed or how it's written. Um, it can be a very hit and miss kind of situation. But we have certainly seen kids in films that are kind of annoying, unfortunately. And then others that deliver amazing performances. Um, and you're right, he is very believable in this role. And the the sort of also his relationship with his brother is hilarious because that's not my relationship with my brother, thank goodness, but the annoying little weather thing, and it's just part of the fun of it, I guess. But yeah, he's really believable, and I do like the stuff where he's interacting with Max, and he's really being very assertive. Max wants to do one thing, and he's like, "No, that's not what we're doing." And he also has a little bit of a mischievous side, which kids that age do have. So, Chris, your thoughts on Joey Kramer here?
Um, the first part of the film up to when he goes back to his house and kind of has that breakdown on the house,
Hmm.
I do find him believable. I like it. He was only 11 or 12, I think, when he filmed this. So I was like,
Hmm.
I'm buying this. Okay, I'm with it. And I work with kids that age. So
Hmm.
I buy this. But after that, I find him to be a little flat. And which is
Mm.
surprising because the stuff that he's supposed to be doing opposite Paul Rubens is supposed to be kind of the comedy and the heart and everything. And even though he's having more fun, his performance got more flat. And I'm not used to that. Usually when kid actors are in scenes where they're enjoying themselves, joy comes easier to kid actors. Don't tell me
Hmm.
why. It just does. But you ask a kid to act scared or act angry, it actually comes a little harder. Not to him. For some reason, it flipped. Uh, because the stuff in the home, especially, where's my mom and dad, that whole thing, like that was absolutely believable and heartbreaking. To go 8 years, I mean, how many of us, if we fast forwarded 8 years,
Mm.
heck, fast forward 1 year, people who go into comas and miraculously they wake up, years later, can you
Yeah.
imagine what that's like? To experience that, to look in a mirror and to see yourself age. In his case, he has no clue what's going on. But the stuff with Rubens actually comes off as very, not Rubens, him. He's just flat to me. And it's kind of a curse, a combination, I think, of the writing. This is a 90-minute Disney film. This
Yeah.
is not an overly complicated thing. But I would like a little bit more for him. Now, I will agree with you. The conversations with his brother, both youth and grown-up brother, were so good.
Mhm.
That relationship was really good. But everything else, I found him to just be a little flat.
Yeah. It's difficult when you're playing opposite Paul Rubens.
Yeah.
But we all know that Paul Rubens could steal the scenes.
Mhm.
Because he is very over the top. And it's difficult to kind of keep up with that, I think. Which then of course brings us to Paul Rubens as Max, who is really the I don't know, the selling point of the film.
Mm-hmm. Probably the biggest
Partic-
name at the time.
Particularly when he goes into his Pee Wee Herman behavior. It's definitely this is the selling point of the film. Um, I think that Max is an interesting character because he starts out playing it pretty straight. He's this alien AI computer. And when he scans David's brain, he picks up kind of all the things that are more of that time period,
Mm-hmm.
the 80s on Earth, and that's when he kind of unleashes the inner Pee Wee Herman. Um, so Chris, I'll ask you, one of the things that came to mind as I was watching it is when he goes into the Pee Wee Hermanisms, does that fit with the tone of this film?
Late 80s, I think it does. I think it works because you start out with, first of all, when we first meet Max, I still can't find Paul Rubens' voice in there. I know there's synthesizers and things being used, but that's really a good job by Paul Rubens.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
when he's
yes.
not doing the Pee Wee stuff, it's really hard to place him. But that's good. That really to me shows the abilities of Paul Rubens as a performer. That it doesn't all have to be the character voice jokes. This was serious, a little bit of synthesizer, worked really well.
Mhm.
When he hit the Pee Wee Herman stuff, it gets a little wacky. Now, as a kid, that's the part you're really gonna like. As an adult, I sat there going, it's not as enjoyable as I get why as a kid I liked this.
Mhm.
I don't like it as much now as I used to, because when you hear Pee Wee Herman, I'm expecting the Pee Wee Herman character, which we got a little bit of. But then it goes away and it's kind of inconsistent, and you don't really have as much time with it as you'd like. So Rubens is really great for kids. And that is the part I remembered most going into this, was the stuff when he gets on the ship. Everything else before that, I was like, oh yeah, that happened. Oh yeah, okay, okay. The stuff with the ship and him flying around and the interactions, compliance. I still do that with my kids or with my kids in class sometimes. Compliance, they have no idea what I'm talking about, but
Mhm.
I do. So Rubens is, I would say, better than passable,
Mhm.
but not really great. I would say mildly good
Yeah,
is a way to put it.
it's an interesting thing because the target audience here
Hmm.
are kids,
Hmm.
and and that's fine. But it's interesting though as adults to go back and look at it, and from the more grown up perspective, and say, yeah, this was seriously entertaining when I was a kid.
When I compare this to um a couple of other movies um that Kleiser directed that I
Mhm.
watched a lot as a kid, two in particular that came after this. Big Top Pee-wee, very helpful here to compare to,
Mhm.
and the other is Honey, I Blew Up the Kid.
Oh yes,
I loved
yes,
the Honey series as a kid.
yes.
Um, and again, they both suffer from exactly the same problem. They have really memorable parts that kids are gonna love, but everything else is forgettable. And your main characters, this goes with Paul Rubens, and in the case of Blew Up the Kid, Rick Moranis, the stuff with them becomes forgettable for a kid, and these are meant for kids. That is a big problem that I see in these two films with Mr. Kleiser's work. Well, three films actually, is these slow beginnings that don't really appeal to a kid. But to be fair, I would say the same thing with E.T. That the kids that do sit through E.T., the beginning of E.T. is slow and
It
boring.
is. Yes.
Absolutely. With kids' films, you got to pick up the pace, but the 80s hadn't figured that out yet. Not in anything other than animation.
Yeah.
So it is a flaw inherent. I don't know if it's just the style filmmaking at the time. I don't know if it's this director. I don't know what it is. Um, like I said, Rubens, he's given everything he's got. It's great in parts, but for the rest of it, it's like, eh.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because it's definitely a take it or leave it kind of performance.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, what are your thoughts on Paul Rubens here as Max?
Well, when he plays it straight, I've seen him play it straight in a couple of other things. You
Hmm.
definitely don't know it's him.
Yeah.
I've seen, like I said, I've seen him do other things, and unless you know that it's him, you don't know that it's him because his voice is completely different. But when he does Pee Wee or the Pee Wee voice, that that's where it clicks,
Hmm.
and then you go, "Oh yeah, I know that guy." And granted, Pee Wee came out when I was older, so I was like, "Hold on,
You know what,
I know
honey,
that."
work with me here on this
Hmm.
because we've watched, but I want to compare one more film that he did that I really liked him in.
Hmm.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, like I said,
See,
Oh,
like
that's
that's one of
right.
the ones that
he's still
I didn't know
goofy,
that that was him,
but
but
you don't recognize him as that. And
no,
that
you don't
movie,
know it's him.
it's a different audience, but the pacing, mind you, that's beginning of the 90s.
Yeah.
It
And he's
picks up.
funny in that.
Even him in Batman Returns when he has no lines. He's great in that.
I didn't even know he was in that.
Yep.
Batman Returns, I
A
didn't
couple
realize it was
times.
him either.
Yes.
You just and I believe Carol Kane
The
as well.
dad of the penguin. Yes.
Yeah, so like he can act. We know that. I want to chalk this up to being a product of the
I
80s.
I think
And
I think it may have had something to do with the writing.
Walt Disney
Yeah,
Pictures
I think
has
so.
never had a history, these kid films in the 80s and before, of really truly appealing to a kid audience. It's
Mm.
hard.
I think part of the problem too is even though they tried to write it for kids and their target audience was for kids, I don't think that they knew how, and Disney was really good about getting, because they had a way of putting kids in seats and doing what do they call that, where you put the kids and let them watch the movie and see how it went.
Yeah. Test screening.
Test
Yeah.
screenings and stuff. But I don't think that they thought to do that with some of these movies. They just put it out there.
But
Mm.
this is just, I think this is a product also of Disney.
Yeah.
Disney
Particularly
and
at that time.
I
yeah,
think in the
Disney.
80s, I think in the 80s what they did is they were just trying to pop out movies and just get them going.
Well,
Mhm.
they really here the thing about the 80s is up to this point, they really didn't have anything that really is that memorable up to this point in terms of live action. I mean, just going back a hair here. So of course we have Flight of the Navigator. Return to Oz, which didn't do that well.
Eek.
Now it's a cult classic. Everyone loves Return to Oz now, but
Yeah.
back then that wasn't a big deal. And
That was a
then
disaster back then.
Tron, which again at the time was
Tron was huge.
Tron was financially a disaster.
Financially, it may have been
And
a disaster, but it was huge.
and I will say, Tron is a slow movie. I
It
love
It is
Tron.
very slow.
Tron is a very slow movie. Then go to Popeye. I do not. I love Robin Williams. I hate Popeye.
Most people did.
It suffers again. Watcher in the
Nobody
Woods.
likes that
Nobody
film.
remembers that. Herbie Goes Bananas, maybe, is the only other one in the 80s that they did that might have been a little more kid friendly.
Well,
I could go on and on and on. These movies are not really kid movies. So live action and kids don't work. Even when they do Honey, I Shrunk the Kids in 2 years, I saw that when I was a kid in the drive-in movie theater. It still is a little slow and really lives up to the spectacle of the film. You know, that really brings in kids. But otherwise, you do not get a big Disney smash until the very end of 1989 when a little film
Mermaid.
called The Little Mermaid comes in and Disney makes its resurgence. Otherwise, live action and everything Disney was slow and they still were suffering, not knowing what to do. Fox and the Hound is a beautiful film about friendship. It's slow.
And
Kids
sad.
don't like it.
So-
Kids
very
don't like
sad.
it. And that's
That's
what
because
you
it's sad.
but
It's
that's
very
what you
sad.
that's what you face here. I think Flight of the Navigator, I loved it because the stuff that I remember is the stuff on the ship and Pee Wee Herman itself. There's just enough action, but in reality, on the ship is only, would you say, about 30 minutes, if that? It's actually not a lot of the film.
Yeah.
It's kind of the late second half to early third of the film. But where this film really sets itself, and we'll talk about it, is in its groundbreaking computer graphics.
It's true.
That is where this film really excels. But unfortunately, the performances and Mr. Rubens with it just don't appeal enough to kids beyond a few short moments.
Yeah, it was very interesting to go back and watch it.
Mhm.
Because my memories of it were that there was a lot more time on the spaceship. And I saw the movie and went, oh, that's only about 20, 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Not very much. But yeah, it is true that Disney in the 80s was really having a hard time. You know, the Black Cauldron had been a big failure.
Very slow. Once
Very
again, very
slow.
slow.
They had some success with The Great Mouse Detective, which is pretty good.
It's another one
Um,
that I still say is slow in the. I love Great
a
Mouse
little
Detective,
bit.
but it's still a little slow. And as a
But
kid, you're not gonna like it, probably.
but you're absolutely right that when Little Mermaid came out, that was the big thing Disney was looking for.
It
That's when
was
the golden age hit.
It
Yep,
well,
the
it's not.
Golden
Yeah,
Age,
the
the
Renaissance.
Renaissance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it's bright, it moves, and it's the same amount of time that this movie is. Little Mermaid, same amount of time. It's an hour and a half movie, and yet that movie, and it's a musical, so you could say it's different, but it moves. It's fast. It's
it
quick, action
really
packed.
takes off from the start.
You love the characters, the voices work, but that's animated. Live action with kids is so much harder to keep their attention,
Yeah,
especially in the 1980s.
yeah, and particularly with other studios that were having success.
Mm-hmm.
Disney was unfortunately not.
Yeah.
And we come now to the looking at sort of the music of the film, which is quite interesting because this is one of the first movie scores to be done entirely electronically. Now, for me, when I think the 80s, I get a sense of, when I think the 80s, you get that kind of slightly techno, slightly synthesized music. There's a certain sound that is associated with the 80s. Now, this score, I would say, it's not a memorable score, but in my mind, it adds a lot to the story.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you that kind of that 80s mysterious, and yet again, Stranger Things used the same kind of technique to evoke that 80s time period. Um, well, Lisa, it's not a particularly memorable score,
No, because I don't remember any of the music.
but how do you feel about what it maybe added to the film,
It
if
must have added
anything?
some. It must have added something, but I don't remember any of the music. I don't remember hearing any of the music.
Yeah, it's one of those films that you're watching
It's
it.
way off in the background because I don't remember hearing any of the music.
Yeah, I was watching the movie going, oh, I like this music as soon as it was over. I was like, I
Yeah,
don't remember any of that.
yeah, I honestly I do not remember hearing any of the music. So it must have
Yeah,
blended in really well.
yeah, Chris,
It's
your thoughts on the music?
well, how can I say anything bad about the one and only Alan Silvestri?
That's true.
How do I say anything bad? I mean, this is the
We're going to talk
man.
about him later this year for sure.
We really aren't, because the year before this, he did a little indie film. It didn't do very well. Back to the something something something
Yes.
something. It had a couple sequels, but anyway, it's Alan Silvestri, and okay. I always say that when the music you don't recognize the music, that's not necessarily a bad thing. When it can blend into what's going on, and you're not really noticing the music, you're noticing the story, and yet like a really good Disney ride should, it's still carrying you through the story. That is what the
Mhm.
music should do. It should carry you through the story, but rarely should the music take over the story. Should never do
Mhm.
that unless it's a musical. Then there's your purpose for that. This film I really enjoyed up to when he got into the ship. There's a very mysterious tone. When we're in the
Mhm.
70s, like the music is that proto 80s that you get. And I
Mhm.
really like it. I kind of enjoy it. Even the opening with the unnecessarily slow-mo dog frisbee show. I don't know why we're at that, but okay. But it's still very much indicative of the 80s to me. And then my favorite part is just flying through the clouds.
Yes.
I just flying, and the music, which is the theme to the Flight of the Navigator, that I do remember because I watched it so many times as a kid. That little piece of score is really underrated here, and I enjoy it thoroughly. The use of synthesizer too. Uh, this isn't the first film to use a synthesizer. It is the first one to compose it entirely in synthesizer,
Yes.
but not the first to use it. Because I can
Definitely
think of
not.
other films, Star Trek motion picture,
Yes. Oh,
that use the
yes.
synthesizer fervently. And
Very
actually,
much.
historically, believe it or not, the idea of the electronic synthesizer was invented closer to World War II.
Mm.
Little piece of music history. It wasn't used as extensively as you would think it is, but they would do manual patches and stuff. But you had some synthesizer work even back then that evolved over time, and then synthesizers started getting used in music. But I would definitely say the 1980s was the era of the synthesizer.
Mhm.
That's when it became portable. You had Casio keyboards, which is just a fancy synthesizer. It really is. And the other things they would play with it. So Silvestri's use of that and acknowledging that, and I think Disney coming off of Tron also wanted that kind of a sound
Oh, yes.
extensively. And so I thought it played out pretty well. I enjoyed Silvestri's work here. Again, you're not going to be humming these tunes, but when you hear it, you're just flying along for the journey.
Yeah. So then we come, of course, to the spectacle. Early morphing effects, which would then be used 2 years later in Willow,
Willow.
to even bigger effects.
Mm-hmm.
The spaceship, which looks kind of like an almond,
I see.
morphs a little bit.
I thought of it when I looked at it as a Nerf football.
Hmm.
That's what it looked like to me. The spirals and the curves that were in it. I
Yeah.
told the kids that, or Moira was with me. I said that looks like a Nerf football to me, especially when it shaped into the almond pointed shape.
Hmm.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it did. But the interesting design of the ship is it's simple. It's a
mhm,
simple design.
Very
On
sleek.
on the outside, yeah, it's very sleek.
mhm,
And I think that it definitely demonstrates the early use of CG in
mhm.
films and using it very little, obviously, because they couldn't afford to use it much more.
Right. Very
But
minimalistic.
it's very minimalist, but it definitely does give the ship a very mysterious alien quality to it
Mhm.
that it's almost undefinable by human standards.
Right.
And it's really hard to tell because there are three different ships. There's the CG ship. There are models for certain flying scenes. And then there is a full-size one that was available for a time on the Hollywood Studios backlot tour. For a time, it was backstage, and you could act, or backlot, you could act, not the inside, you couldn't see the inside, but the actual working outside that they used. Like, for example, when they brought the ship into the hangar and you watch them kind of carrying the ship in, that is a full-size ship. That was a full size. When he is walking up to the ship, that is a full size model.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, anytime you saw them actually interacting, it is a full size model. And I think they were beautiful, and at times are kind of seamless. In fact, I think they pioneered the reflection techniques off of the hull itself.
Yeah.
So that way, not only is it shiny, but whatever surroundings were around it were properly reflected in that. And it took a lot of computing power. In fact, once they did that and went into editing for rendering and all of that, every frame had to be put in one at a time into the computer. And once it was rendered and saved, they had to delete all the data and start with the next frame. They could only do it one frame at a time.
Hmm.
How insane is that? That it looks that beautiful for being that low on power.
Yeah. And this is a 40-year-old movie.
Hmm.
Pretty amazing. Lisa, your thoughts?
I think the ship was absolutely amazing. I think my favorite parts were the inside of the ship, though, how they did the
Yes.
inside. The
Yes.
the way everything just moved up and down and everything was seamless. And I know that they did that through I I don't know how if some of it was actual or if it was CGI, but it I don't care. It was absolutely beautiful.
The inside was built. The inside that you see filmed was built as is, with the exception of like the screen. The screen was something that is played with a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But otherwise, they're filming it, and there are stories that this guy, that the Joey Kramer, tells that when he goes in, I mean, it is chrome to a detail. And
Mm-hmm.
anyone who owns chrome or even stainless steel knows
Ah,
fingerprints are your
Oh,
enemy.
yes.
And they
Yes.
would have to stop scenes because they'd have close ups. His fingerprints were getting all over, and they'd have to polish it, re-clean, and reshoot. It was a nightmare to film in because they were always wanting that
Pristine.
ethereal, outwardly pristine look. They're
Yeah.
like, there should be no fingerprints in the future.
Yeah.
right. I drove truck. I don't like chrome.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Yep.
beautiful to look at, but it's a hassle. And the puppetry. You forget there's puppets, really good puppets in here.
Oh, that little bitty guy that he had. That
Very dark crystal looking puppets.
Yeah.
yes.
Just I even okay, the eyeball. I love
Yes,
the
that's
eyeball.
cool.
All the effects of the puppetry done in here. The stuff in the ship is beautiful, absolutely great. See, this is why you remember it as a kid. These kinds of little things that you're like, oh, there's this creature, and that
And the
that would appeal.
and the critter that ate his hat.
Yes,
Yes.
the
Oh,
critter that
yes.
ate his
Love
hat.
that. Looking like a very Fraggle Rock kind of creature.
Don't get too close.
He
Oh,
hasn't
yeah.
eaten, David.
But yes, that brings us to the end of Flight of the Navigator. Certainly a nostalgic classic for those who were up to it. And we certainly enjoyed talking about it. Well, turning back over to you, Captain.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is one that I admit it has flaws and problems. It's not really a great film, but it's a great film in my mind as a kid. And I think the memories of just sitting there, and especially that last third of the film, as a kid you love it. And it
Mm-hmm.
sticks there, and it's just such a great joy to get to share it. And my oldest is I'm going to make her watch it at some point. She has to watch it. But
Yes.
that's okay. All right. So next week we go back on the normal schedule. And we I'll take a look at a little animation. Little animation next week. So of course we will have 3 Star Trek episodes to review next week.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see here what we already randomized them last time.
Yep.
So I'm just clarifying here. Make sure we got it all up. There we go. Okay, so we are taking a look at original series, season 1, episode 3. One of Our Planets is Missing. I watched this week.
Mm-hmm.
I like to knock the animated series. Not going to happen with this one. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Lower Decks, season 4, episode 2. I have no bones, yet I must flee. Another really fun one. And then Star Trek Prodigy, season 2, episode 7, The Fast and the Curious. So we got a lot of great stuff to look at this week. Next month, for the month of April, our movie of the month is going to be, well, it's got like 5 titles. I remember it as Live, Die, Repeat, but most people remember it as The Edge of Tomorrow, Tom Cruise, Emily Blunt. That's going to be a good, fun film to watch. I was waiting for Brennan to go, yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, Brennan, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Blue Sky at brennmar.bluesky.social. I think that's how it goes.
Something like that.
And you can find me on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple at Page Turners They Were Neat.
And you can find me on Twitch and Twitter at cingle1984. And before we go, I have to thank my wife again for subbing in, watching this movie with me. Thank you, honey.
No problem.
Hey,
Anytime.
want to watch Tom Cruise next month?
I'll probably end up watching it with you anyway.
Here's a hint, guys. Most of them, she watches with me. I think we'll have another guest for that. But anyway, as always, we end every episode. Kapla! And live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.